This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by Highball Graphics. For over 25 years, Highball Graphics has been providing high-quality decals for railroads in New England, Canada, and beyond. With over 2,000 sets in scales N through G, Highball Graphics has you and your project covered. Highball Graphics specializes in custom decal orders, serving freelance railroads worldwide. Check out their easy-to-use website at highballgraphics.com or email them at info@highballgraphics.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott. So glad you could join us. On today's show, we're talking to Jim Wiggin. Jim, welcome to the show.
Hey, Ray, thanks for the welcome, and glad to be on board.
Glad to have you here. I forgot to say in the intro that you're coming to us from it's Illinois, right? Not Illinois.
Well, it depends. You know, I am a New Englander, and I have been accused of putting different letters where they don't belong. But you know what? I'm true to my Illinois roots.
There you go. So glad to have you here. So Jim, you're the associate brand manager at Athern, just in case you didn't know and didn't read your business card. I'm telling the audience as well. And Jim is also been seen quite a bit on a lot of the Athern social media stuff, the content creation. You're heavy into that. So we're going to talk about that a little later. We're going to get to know Jim, the modeler, in the beginning of the show here. But last time I get to see you in person, before we got on the show here, saw you at the Amherst Railway Society 2023 Railroad Hobby Show. And it was good to see you there in person. What was your take on the show?
Well, you know, I'm a little biased. My true home is 3 hours north of that show. And so I've always been really... That's probably one of my favorite shows. So I'm a little biased. But I think this year was a great turnout. I believe the reports were, and correct me if I'm wrong, just a little bit over 23,000 attendees this year, which was great. I mean, the energy level was just phenomenal. And, you know, it was great to get back out there and see folks, you know, modelers in their natural environment. It was really a lot of fun.
Yeah, for sure. It was the weather cooperated this year, which was certainly a much needed for getting everything back on track. And then, the attendance Saturday was really, I was there both days. Saturday was booming. Sunday was a little lighter, but still had a great attendance level on Sunday. Sunday was it was kind of nice. You could a little more elbow room and get around and see folks, but yeah, definitely good to see them back on track.
Yeah, it really was. And, you know, of course, Sunday gave me a chance to, and I was also with Mark Williams. He's the category manager of Athern, and John Stackpole. He's our lead developer. And that gave us a chance to kind of walk around and maybe relinquish some money from our wallets. So you get to not only, you know, working the show, but you get to enjoy the show and exactly.
Get to take that in. And of course, yeah, people go to the Amherst show to spend money. That's for sure.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot to be purchased there, a lot to see. And you know, how is it for somebody that's working for a manufacturer? Does it seem like you get a lot of people coming up with a ton of ideas, and how does that all sort out?
Oh, certainly. I mean, whether it's in the booth or if I'm out walking around. I mean, since I am on social media and live so much, it's you do run into people that see you from those lives, and yeah, they've got a lot of ideas. And my only wish is that we had the bandwidth, the manpower to put some of these ideas in there, because most of the ideas that modelers bring to me, anyways, I think are exceptionally good ideas. It's just a matter of time and money to actually make those ideas possibilities.
Absolutely, yeah. It's I'm sure. I mean, I talked to a couple other manufacturers, and kind of doing the same thing. And as I'm saying it, I kind of feel bad for them, because I think that they've probably been bombarded all weekend with somebody else's ideas. But it probably is great to be able to be out within the people and kind of learning at the foot of the customer.
Oh, it absolutely is. I mean, for the last few years, of course, we've been working through a pandemic, and so we were not able to go to shows. We were seeing, emails and, comments on social media. But when you actually have somebody that I consider a peer, I mean, we're all modelers, and most of the guys that I work with at Athern are modelers. So when you're amongst your peers in person, it's a totally different experience, and it's a lot more rewarding, in my opinion.
Absolutely. So you mentioned that you're a modeler, and we'll get into talking about that. What brought you into the model railroad hobby?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I grew up at a small airport. My father was deep into aviation. My grandfather was a World War II naval veteran, taught folks how to fly airplanes. I was supposed to be the third generation pilot, and growing up at a small airport, one would think I would have pursued that. Actually, I did not. It's been kind of a mystery, but what we can trace its roots to is a Christmas morning in 1975 when my older brother had purchased a AHM bicentennial HO scale train set for me.
Wow.
And apparently that was enough to, spark the imagination to get into model railroading, because really there was nobody in my family that had any direct connection with railroading at all.
Well, you said the airplanes kind of went to the side and the trains kind of slip in and become the hobby.
Right.
So from that train set, I mean, imagine you get that set up and you're kind of running the 4x8 kind of operation for that first train set?
Yeah, I think that's kind of a prerequisite for all of us modelers, is to start with that 4x8 HO scale layout. It was rather simple in those early days, just setting it up on the floor on that piece of plywood. It was the old brass snap track that was available at the time, and real simple, just an oval. And then as I got a little bit older, as I got into grade school, my dad came home one night with a Combat published book on model railroading with, I believe it had 8 simple railroads that you could build. I still have that book to this day. It's worn out, but it's such a cool book to draw inspiration from occasionally. And we went about building it was about a 16 by 4 foot dogleg style layout in HO. And I had that for a number of years. It was pretty much a product of its time. And as far as my expertise, it was a simple loop with a couple of turnouts. And, my roster was mainly built up from AHM, which was still around at that time, Model Power, Tyco, things of that nature. It wasn't until somebody in the family purchased me a blue box Athearn that I was like, wow, this is this is an improvement. And that just made me want to get into the hobby even more.
Yeah. Well, so while you were doing that and you get your first Athearn blue box, and was the prototype kind of on the radar too? I mean, was it railroading or model railroading kind of running together?
So it started with the model railroading, but it kind of went from there. Even as a child, I wanted to mimic real life. And I knew just, buying something off the shelf didn't really translate to what I saw on a daily basis. Fortunately, my dad, being rather mechanically inclined, was interested in all types of machinery. And I distinctly remember him walking me down about a quarter of a mile from our house, was the main line for the Boston to Maine's Northern line. And at the time, they still did some switching operations in my small town of Pennacook. And so he took me down there one night, and I just remember as a child what I thought at the time were massive blue Boston to Maine locomotives switching out cars. I came to find out later on those were just GP7s, GP9s. But it was enough to say, okay, you know what? My model railroad needs to mimic that. First of all, I don't have any Boston to Maine engines.
Yep. And
so then I went out on a quest, if you will, to find as much stuff that I could mimic from what I was seeing in real life. So the models kind of led to the prototype, and then the prototypes just fed the modeling habit.
So put a kind of a date, put us, where we're at in time here. So you said, 75 or so, you got as a kid, and now you're starting to get these blue boxes. About what? So we're talking about maybe early mid 80s now, or?
Yeah, we're talking early 80s. This was before Guilford had formed really, or had purchased the Boston and Maine. Railroading in general in New Hampshire was okay. It was definitely more prevalent than it is now.
Sure.
And so, yeah, we're talking about 82, I'd say.
Yeah. So where were you sourcing this stuff? I mean, there certainly, if anybody doesn't know this, there was no internet in 1982 or 3 that you could go buy stuff on. So where were you sourcing the stuff to get yourself set up with the Boston and Maine?
So I was fortunate enough to have in the city of Concord, there was about, at that time, 3 to 4 hobby shops. And model railroading was always pretty active in New Hampshire because back then it seemed like winters were a lot longer. So unless you were into outdoor activities like skiing or snowmobiling, you were, inside working on your model railroad. And so I did have quite a few hobby shops to draw from. One in general was a place called Toy City. It was just amazing for somebody of my age at that time, just filled to the brim with everything from slot cars to just a whole wall of AccuRail and Roundhouse and Athern car kits. And I would spend, according to my parents, I'd spend hours. It was probably more like 20 minutes looking at each box and seeing if I could find Boston and Maine on the label, and then opening it up to say, okay, this blue Boston and Maine boxcar, this is going to work for my layout, that type of thing.
Yeah. So that hobby shop really influential on you, to have that. It's just so important how these hobby shops and the influence that they have, even to this day, they're so highly influential, and what they're stocking and the people in there and helping, and it was almost like it was the lifeline back in that era to be able to have a hobby shop like that.
Absolutely. I had another experience that kind of brought a more personable feeling to want to model the Boston and Maine. At this point, I was young grade school student, and my mom had picked me up from school, and we were on our way to where my dad worked at the airport. And we pulled up at the intersection, and there was a mid-70s International pickup truck, bright yellow with high railer gear on it, and it had a Boston and Maine McGinnis logo on the door. And I looked over at my mom and I said, you think that guy works for Boston and Maine? And my mom says, well, roll down your window and find out. New Hampshire has always been a rather friendly state. And so I rolled down my window and I asked this gentleman who was beside me, and, hey, you work for the Boston and Maine? And he did. I don't remember exactly what kind of conversation we had, but I remember him asking me if I had a model railroad, and he asked me what, railroad do I model? And of course I said Boston and Maine.
Yep.
And, just that short interaction with that maintenance worker that day, that really gave me a time and place, and it cemented, my love for the Boston and Maine and its employees.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Great when you get a friendly employee that, influences you that way and encourages a young fella to model the Boston and Maine. From that, and you as you're starting to develop this this love for the Boston and Maine, obviously from an meeting this employee, and then you had already started to model it. Where'd you take that layout from there?
Sure. I mean, at that point, now I had a source of inspiration. It was probably my earlier prototype modeling in grade school. I did not have any luck, however, of finding Boston and Maine locomotives and cabooses, or buggies as they call them. And so just perfectly happened that I had a hobby shop open within, I'd say, a quarter of a mile of my house. And this hobby shop only carried model railroading supplies. And so curiosity, of course, got the best of me. And I walked down there one day and I met somebody who was very influential in my life. His name was Alan Belcher. He owned a shop called Concord Car Shops, and he specialized in HO and N scale model railroading, but he was also a custom painter.
Oh, great.
And for the first time ever, I walked into this shop, and I'll never forget the smell. We talk about this on other things, the first time you went to a ball game, or the first time, you went to a sports arena or something. That smell sticks with you. And I'll never forget the smell of AccuPaint and AccuCals as I walked into that building. It was just a little converted garage, one car garage that he converted to a hobby shop, N scale on one side, HO on the other, and his spray booth and such in the back. And when I walked in there, immediately I saw Boston and Maine and other New England and Canadian roads that were not available through what, the avenues I had found before.
Right.
So that kind of got me asking questions, and I felt sorry for the guy in years past, because I must have just bugged this guy with so many questions. And finally, one day he's like, you know what? Let me show you how to do this. And I took it was an Athern Blue Box F unit. Yep. And he airbrushed it for me, but I took it home later and I decaled it, did everything that he told me to do, and I'd bring it back. And it was kind of a teacher-student relationship. He would check it out. Oh, you got to fix this. So you got to do that. And I'd fix it. I'd take it home. I'd fix it. I'd come back. And we had this back and forth. And before I knew it, by the time I wasn't even in junior high, I was custom painting stuff.
Oh, wow.
And that's what started that seed of really, now I had the possibility of not only seeing what I wanted to model, but I could replicate it. And I wasn't constrained by what the manufacturers were making at that time. I could actually make it myself.
Yeah, what a gift he gave you, to be able to find somebody that knows how and take you under his wing and teach you this stuff. That's an absolutely amazing opportunity.
Yeah, it absolutely was, and it became another enjoyable aspect of the hobby. Now, granted, it's something I don't partake in as much anymore, just because we live in an absolute golden age of model railroading. As we all know, there's so many manufacturers out there that make road name and road number specific locomotives that you don't have to unless you really want to. But that being said, it really got me on the path to prototype modeling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like you said, it was filling a gap with a custom painting back in that day, and it makes me think, and it may be a little off tangent, but I've traveled quite a bit and gone into a multitude of different hobby shops, and I always just have this hope that when you go into a hobby shop, and like up in where you grew up, you'd walk in and you would see Boston and Maine stuff because you're in that territory, or you would go into a hobby shop in Canaan, Connecticut, and you would see Housatonic Railroad, and you would just hope that and sometimes it happens, but not nearly enough, it seems. But really cool that you got a guy local that was painting them and being able to provide you what you were looking for, that had that local flavor to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And he was patient enough with me. I mean, at the time, we're talking mid 80s now. So I was, grade school just before junior high, and you know how boys at that age are. Of course, I had a million questions, and I wish I had a third of the amount of energy I had back then. Now,
don't we all?
But he was patient. He was extremely patient, and I think he saw the potential of getting youth in the model railroading hobby. I mean, even back in the mid 80s, we had the naysayers saying, the hobby's dying and it's going away. And
one day I hope we can put that argument to bed.
Amen.
Yeah. I had this same conversation on a past interview with Tim Blackwell, the publisher and editor of Cowcatcher magazine. And, we were really talking about this, and I said, you got to let that thought go. It's not dying. It's evolving. It's just changing. And
it's
just
evolving.
Like everything
exactly.
else. It's an evolving thing.
Yeah, it really is. It's just how the younger guys approach the hobby. And it's not the same as, myself and some of the older generations where we did have the hobby shop locally and we did have the blue box. The guys now, they're used to, say, Genesis style locomotives. And quite frankly, I think the younger guys have some of the best looking layouts, because in my time, I spent all my time detailing and painting locomotives and rolling stock and didn't really have a layout. Yeah. These young guys now have a layout. And the other thing that I like too about these younger guys is they don't have any fear. They just go ahead and they dive in. If they make a mistake, they just say, okay, whatever, I've learned from that. And they just keep going. And I really appreciate that about the younger modelers.
Oh, for sure. One thing you can say is, for anybody who thinks the hobby's dying and, that doesn't want to see it die, take a hint from the guy that mentored you and do the same thing to the next younger generation, which is, teach them something that and pass it along. That's what keeps it alive. If you just want to sit in your chair and say the hobby's dying, then you're probably right. If in your mind, and it's perception reality kind of thing. But if instead you get up and find a young gentleman, relate to him. Don't try to jam something that you like down their throat. Find something that they like, relate to them, and then teach them just the same as you received.
Absolutely. And, a good case in point of that. Now, technically New Hampshire is still my home. My club is the Concord Model Railroad Club, and they actually meet in my hometown. Yep. And a case in point of this whole situation was a couple of years back, I was at one of the club meetings, and we have a modular style layout in an old classroom. And our membership base is pretty average age, probably 50s, 60s, and some retired folk. And one night, I want to say there was about 3 or 4, I call them young guys. They're in their 20s, 25 or so, college age. They came in and they had to have been fresh from rail fanning, because they're wearing the high-vis vest, and they've got their scanners with them and everything else. And they walked in, they said, hey, can we join? And we're like, well, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And boy, putting it into perspective too, to make me feel like the dinosaur of the group, they wanted to run their trains. They had brought some locomotives to run. And they said, hey, here's the throttle. I hand them a Hammerhead NCE throttle. Here you go. This is the address, or whatever. And they looked at me and they said, what's your Wi-Fi? And I said, what do you mean, what's my Wi-Fi? And fortunately, our president, John, said, oh, the Wi-Fi is this. And they're all whipping out their Androids and their iPhones, and they're using their throttles through the phones. So for once, I felt dated very quickly at that point. But it was great to see 4 young, enthusiastic modelers show up.
Yeah, it just understand that next generation, like you said before, they're doing it differently. It's not wrong. It's just different, and right. And they want to. The technology is the stuff they've grown up with, and they've had it in their hands for almost as long as they've been alive. And that's how they relate. And if you're a club, or you got to relate to the younger generation if you want the younger generation to participate. That's just 101 right there. Of getting people involved and getting them interested, and understanding what the value is, what they're going to get out of it. And if you're a mentor, or if you have that ability to mentor, but in a way that relates to them, you're going to win. You're going to get young folks, and they're going to get involved, and your club's going to go on long beyond you.
It's something that we see in other things. Model railroading is not exclusive to this. I see this a lot in the car culture, background that I have. We have the older guys that have traditional hot rods, have traditional customs or restos, and they're like, oh, this hobby is dying. The kids don't want to do it anymore, and that's nothing could be further from the truth. There's a lot of young people that are getting into that hobby, but they do it differently. They're not into flatheads and white walls and chrome. They're into what they see, and the same can be said about model railroading. A lot of your young guys aren't really into railroads that they've never seen before. They're modeling what they see now. They're seeing class 1s or some of these really cool short lines. And so, yeah, they're going to model with ditch lights, and they're going to model with the appropriate PTC antenna arrays and stuff that some of us older guys are like, we have no use for that.
Yeah, you grew up around GP7s, GP9s, and they grew
exactly.
up, they're growing up around GEVOs.
Exactly.
It's how they relate. You guys have in sense, you have the same story with a different model locomotive. That's it. But it's the same
That's
story.
all it is.
They fell in love the same way. They went wherever they grew up. They went trackside. They were driving somewhere. They saw it. Maybe they talked to a class 1 employee the same way and fell in love with it. So yeah, it's getting to relate. I'm glad you brought this up. We kind of went a little bit on a tangent, but it's an important one for the future of our hobby. Is getting away from that conversation. The hobby is dying. Just stop. Just please. Just let it
Stop
go.
putting the iceberg in front of the Titanic.
Yeah, we've got so many. I mean, you walk through Amherst, and like you said, look at all the manufacturers that are out there, and them popping up and get and finding these niche things that a major manufacturer may not even be able to process because they're so drilled down niche kind of stuff. This is fantastic. Golden era is absolutely right, and I think we're really in a good place with it. There's always room for improvement. There's always things that can go, that be done better. Or there's always, but we're still living the information age, plus all the ability that we have to manufacture now in such high detail. It certainly is the golden era.
Yeah, it really is, and it's. To me, I really think compared to what I had in the past, I think the younger generation, I don't want to say they've got it easier. They're going to have their own struggles in their own areas, but I think it's they're more adept to making it accessible, and they have one of the biggest tools that we didn't have, and that's the internet, that's YouTube. And we definitely saw that, just coming from a manufacturer's perspective, we definitely saw that during the pandemic. I mean, with the pandemic having us pretty much sheltered in place, a lot of people had time to do other things. And across industry-wide, we saw, RPG games go up in popularity. We saw trading cards go up in popularity. Model building went up in popularity. And, of course, model railroading did as well. And for the younger guys who are adept at doing searches, it was real easy for them to find product and have it brought to their door and, turn out amazing layouts, whether it be a rather large layout or these shelf layouts that you're seeing that are getting to be so popular.
Yeah, it seems to be changing the hobby with the shelf layouts, seeing that pop up. Plus you said the pandemic stuff, and not only are these guys also ordering stuff and being able to get it online to their door, and then you got this younger crowd and a plethora of really great content creators that are making videos and sharing. Not only they share it out, they just do it in a different way. I mean, I love print. I certainly think there's a value to print, but there's also these young guys that are able to go on. They use the platforms that are available to them and create some great videos and share out some great information that we all benefit from.
Absolutely.
I'm currently working on an Athern Genesis locomotive for a friend. I need to take the numbers off the side of it, right on YouTube, punch it in, and certainly there's a great video right there on how to remove the decals on the side to renumber it. It's all right there, right at our fingertips, and that younger generation's really helping drive a lot of that. Not to say that there's older folks on there creating great content too. They are, but that's really the younger generation drive and the new technology that we're getting to take advantage of.
Yeah, and it really forces the rest of us to look at our hobby and say, how can we improve our hobby? One of the things that I've enjoyed immensely, I'd say in the last 10 years, is how much the younger generation has really upped the prototype game. And I mean that in a couple of different ways. Not only in how they detail their layouts or their models themselves, but how they actually operate. And it's been a little bit, but you interviewed Isaac Fabriz, and he's one of those guys I met years ago, back when I had a prototype model of the Galesburg City job. And just the amount of detail that he had in operating his simple one switch layout made it that much more involved, made it that more interesting. Sure. On the surface, it looks like a simple layout with one spur, and you're thinking, okay, I'm done in 5 minutes? No, if you did it per his specs, if you did it per the prototype, it would take you well over 20 minutes to do a simple job. And it was actually fun the way he had it laid out.
Yeah, for sure. Isaac, we had back quite a bit ago, and he's got an excellent layout. But he is basically the kind of that cross section example of the younger model railroader for sure, and the things, the information that the information they're gathering. And if I remember correctly, I think Isaac, he's got his era set in 95. That was kind of his era, and somewhere around there in the mid 90s, I believe. And again, a testament to that's old school for him. Some of us might think sometimes I think 95 is like 10 years ago, but
it seems like it.
Makes us feel old and whatnot. But that's great. Let's get back to, we kind of went on a great tangent, but I want to get kind of back to Jim a little bit. Let's talk about teenage Jim now. You said you kind of, after you've met this mentor at the local hobby shop, and he's taught you how to paint, and you're doing all this. Did you kind of find yourself putting the hobby kind of on the shelf for a little bit in your teenage years, or did you able to power through?
Yeah, I was like your typical teenager of the time. I found, the cars, the girls, and of course school and sports. Had the dream of playing baseball in high school. Didn't really get to complete that. I tried many failed attempts to purchase different muscle cars of that era, which is another hobby of mine. I'm a complete grease monkey when it comes to cars. And so I got into cars. I went to a lot of car shows, tried to find stuff to fix up and work on and things of that nature. And of course, girls and studies. And so model railroading kind of took a little bit of a hiatus. I also got into radio control airplanes at the time. So finally the airplane thing kind of kicked in.
On a smaller scale, yep.
Yeah, a little bit smaller scale. I did that for a number of years and, enjoyed it. But really what happened was flash forwarding through high school and through college. We were starting to see in New England a lot of flying fields become endangered because, quite frankly, New Hampshire is a paradise, and there's a lot of people in New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and other places that were moving in. So they were kind of taking over the airfields and building up housing divisions. And so it was getting harder and harder for me to enjoy that hobby. It was taking up so much time just driving to a flying field to fly for, a couple of flights and then drive home another hour or two. And, one day I was like, this is fun, but I think really my hobby is trying to take something in miniature and make it mimic something in real life. And there's other hobbies that I could do. So I explored plastic model cars, which was fun, but for me anyways, not as much fun as the real thing. Got into RC cars for a little bit. That time the technology just wasn't there to have a convincing radio control car. And then I remembered model railroading, and I was like, that's one of those hobbies where I can really, dive deep if I want to. And so this time, though, I switched scales. I went from HO, I went to N scale, mainly because room. Didn't have a lot of room where I was at.
Right.
So I built a very simple 2-foot by 4-foot N scale layout and picked up a few locomotives. And at that point, internet still wasn't really around. I was all self-taught. And with each subsequent layout in N scale, they kept getting better, and they started becoming more of an operations-based layout versus a strict circle type layout.
Do you remember that pivot point where you went from that there were operations kicked in? Because it just seems like that just kind of if you want to think of it like a line graph, that's like your pivot point upwards, right, in the hobby.
Sure.
So what was that? What sparked the operations interest for you?
Sure. When I had the first, I'd say it was the second N scale layout I built, and these were all track plans that were available through some type of Combach or Atlas publication. And I built one on a hollow core door. And it was the first layout that I actually had completed that would successfully run without derailments and everything else. And I remember when I drove in the Golden Spike, if you will, and cracking the brand new MRC throttle on my Kato E8.
Yep.
And seeing just, oh, wow, this is running so great. And I mean, there's that excitement. It's like, wow, it's running and everything is staying on track. And the second time around, yeah, that's kind of cool. And the third time around, you kind of put your eye on the level of a rail fan, like, oh, that's cool. And then after a while, it's like, okay, now what?
Yeah.
It's completed the circuit 4 or 5 times. Now what? What do we do?
Yep.
And that's when I started being self-taught again and saying, okay, what does this boxcar really carry? Where is it going? What commodity is it dropping off, or what commodity is it picking up? Why does it exist? Because even at this point, not being as knowledgeable about railroads as I am now, I knew that, real life trains aren't just going in circles across the country. They're going to a destination for a reason. What's that reason? And let's see if we can make this a game. And I think that would have been roughly around 93, 94.
Yeah, what a difference it makes. I go back quite often to a Don Iris quote, which is, "Nice railroad, what does it do?" And
right.
it's just the way Don sees it, and we interviewed Don a couple episodes ago, and he was heavy into operations early on, and still is a big operations guy, and it really makes a difference when you start to have a purpose for what you're building, other than to, like you said, you watch it go around so many times and it's kind of over, and maybe you turn around, go the other way, and it looks good for another few minutes, but it really, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're listening, and your trains go around, you do that, and that's what makes you happy, that's what you should be doing. It's your railroad. Exactly. And what you want to do. For folks like me and Jim, you kind of learn the same thing, and a lot of people that I know as well. It's the operations just open up a whole new dimension to it.
Yeah, it gives it a sense of purpose. And yeah, I definitely don't mean any disrespect. There are definitely some very talented modelers out there who have done some incredible layouts where they're heavy. They're not as heavy on operations as what I would be used to. Certainly those folks, they get a different type of enjoyment out of that, out of this hobby than I do. So no disrespect to them. And I mean, they're beautiful layouts. Don't get me wrong.
George Sellios.
The same could be said about some modular, activities. N-Track, which I'm an N-Track modeler as well. There are times when, it's fun to set up the N-Track modules and sit in the pit, as they say, and, eat a powdered donut from Kroger and talk about the great misses of train shows past. I could have gotten that Concore passenger set, but I missed it by this much. They're like fishing stories.
Yep.
But other times too, it's also fun to check out the guys doing Fremo and seeing what they're doing, how they're operating. And so every aspect of the hobby, that's the great thing about this hobby, is there's something in it for everyone.
Are you saying Almost Bought is the fishing story version of model railroading? I
think so. Yeah. I don't know how many times I hear that at a show. I'll go to a show either as a civilian, enjoying the show for myself, or as an Athern employee. And I remember back in 95, this guy had a brass, Berkshire, complete with the coffin, water heaters. And I could have had it for this much, but it's equivalent to our fishing stories. Definitely.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's, I've heard that more than once. That's for sure. So you find yourself an N scaler. You're starting to, get into operations. When do you start really kind of networking out beyond, you said self-taught and maybe a couple, some connections with some hobby shops. When does the network start to build? When do you start to meet some of the people that are in the hobby doing kind of similar things?
Sure. Once I had gotten out of the RC airplanes and decided to spend my time with model railroading, even in my early 20s, I knew the best thing that you can do is to join a club, because that way you've got a background of, many, many people with different ways of attacking the same thing. And so I quickly joined the Conquer Model Railroad Club. And right away, I started making connections with guys that were custom painters and guys that were basically engineers as far as construction of bench work, track planning, things of that nature. And was really blessed with that club because we had a really good range of guys. And, I really learned a lot just by joining that club. And then not too soon after that, I moved to Illinois, central Illinois. And I had just basically gotten a job working in the hobby industry, not what I'm doing now, and so I walked into a hobby shop and I said, hey, is there any clubs around here? And they said, yeah, there's a N-scale club. And of course my ears were peaked. I was an N-scaler. It was perfect. And that's where I learned about N-track. And so I joined a local N-track club. And that, of course, the beauty of N-track or any of these modular clubs is you have a community of club members in your area, but you connect with people from all over the country, all over the United States and Canada. And because of those connections, I met a lot of talented modelers that were more than willing to kind of show me the ropes, if you will.
Right. I've done the same, and I've talked to many people on the show here where, the club, if you're looking to meet some new people and pick up some great skills, a club is a great place to look.
It really, really was, and it was a great stepping stone for me. We had a show here in Central Illinois, Lincoln Square, which used to be a mall. The show still goes on every March, April, but it was a lot bigger back in the 90s. And we would have an N-track display made up from our local club in Champaign, coupled with an N-track club in Bloomington, Chicago, Milwaukee, Dayton. And the beauty of it is you just had so many modelers with so many different talents set up for the weekend. And to me, being a sponge, I was just like, there was just so much to draw from. And so I learned very quickly about, hey, how to detail an N-scale locomotive, how to, make it look better or more like the prototype, or, how to lay track for, without having any incidents, derailments and stuff, how to make bench work that's light and portable without breaking your back, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So you joined the club, you're building more operations into your personal N-scale layout, and then it sounds like you're starting to build a bit of a career into the hobby industry as well. So what kind of leads you into that path?
So that had led me into kind of at the ground floor. I originally had applied for a job at a company called Hobbico, who was an RC distributor, and they wanted to get more into trains. And so I thought, hey, you know what? I've got some marketing experience. I had gone to college for marketing. Hey, let's try this out. And while waiting for Hobbico to respond, I got in touch with somebody that worked for their competitor, Horizon Hobby. And they said, man, you know what? You've got a lot of technical skill. You want to get a job at Horizon? I could probably get you in there in a day. And I was like, at this point, I had just moved cross country from New Hampshire. So I was like, you know what? Yeah, let's do this. So I started out in just product support. Back in those days, you had a phone and a dealer or a customer would call you and say, hey, I got a problem with, this hobby thing. And you'd help them out. And that was the end of it. I did that for about little over a year. And then my first opportunity to get closer to model railroading in the industry came in 2000 when I accepted a job at Testors. And if you've ever had Testors Model Master paint or those little square bottles of paint, you're familiar with Testors.
Oh, yeah.
Started out there doing the same thing, kind of a product support capacity, and an opening had presented itself to me through the Floqual and Pactra brands. And of course, Floqual being railroad paint, and I was a custom painter. It was just a perfect fit. So I went into that as a brand manager / marketer, and I had that job for pretty much close to 7 years until, ironically, the company I work for now kind of put that business out of business.
Did the smells bring you back to Floqual that you talked about earlier? That the smells of the paint shop, and seemed like home, I'm sure.
Yeah, it was. And I mean, when I was working for Testers, I had a really great shift. I would start work typically I'd be at the plant at 6:30 in the morning, and I would do all of my marketing stuff, all of my follow-up stuff at the time with the actual railroads we were working with. And then I'd be home by 3:00 in the afternoon, and I'd just fire up the airbrush. And that was a great time because I painted so many of my N-scale locomotives and rolling stock at the time. And it was a lot of fun. Didn't last as long as I would have liked to because the industry was changing rapidly.
So we go from, you started at Athearn, you go to Testers, you go to Floquil, and then what gets you back over to Athearn?
So when I first started with Horizon, it was actually, Athearn wasn't even a part of the brand, part of the corporation yet.
Oh, okay.
It was just purely RC.
Okay.
So I was answering RC questions most of the day.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. And then Testers, of course. And then from Testers, I'd say probably in the mid to later 2000s, paints in general were just flatlining. Yeah. And so a lot of us at Testers were let go. And I found myself, looking for a job. And that Hobbico that I had talked about earlier, they had a position open in marketing, but it was for RC airplanes. And so I did that for a number of years. And then I moved on to publishing. I actually went to work for Karstens Publishing. Now, if Karstens sounds familiar, they were the original owners of Railroad Model Craftsman and Railroad and Railfan. Right. And ironically, the joke in the office was, we're going to hire the model railroader to work for Flying Models. I was the associate editor of Flying Models. Despite its title, it was nothing to do with young people that were flight attendants in the industry. It was model airplanes. And, I didn't mind. I had some experience with that. And so I did a lot of writing, did a lot of reviews. But I secretly envied the guys over at RMC, Bill Schomburg being one of them. And there's a funny story. While I was working for Flying Models, I snuck in a article for RMC and actually got the cover for it. It was the February, I believe it was the 2011 February cover. My CB&Q GP30 made the cover. And I did a article on super detailing a GP30 and N scale for the CB&Q. And so that was a lot of fun. I had some exposure with those guys. I'd say probably 2014, Karstens sold RMC to White River. Yep. And all of the titles made it except for Flying Models. I'm still trying to grasp why a railroad publishing company wouldn't want to add a model airplane title to their list. But no, that didn't go on. And so I had a series of jobs throughout the years, including my own custom paint. And I did that for a number of years, custom detail and painting. Yep. And then had a rather successful job selling cars. Because as I mentioned, cars is my other hobby.
Right.
And I was fortunate enough to be working at a really nice dealership. And not only was I getting to sell, your traditional mundane SUVs, I got to sell Mustangs and Corvettes and Lincolns and cool stuff like that. And I was really enjoying the job and everything was perfect. And I got a phone call one day and it was an old coworker friend of mine. And he says, "Hey, you know what? Athearn's looking for somebody." And I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I felt like Shatner. I felt like I could not get away from the hobby industry like Shatner could not get away from Star Trek. And I originally said no. I'm not really interested. I'm making really good money here. I'm having a fun time. I had just purchased my first Mustang. Yeah. I'm like, but I thought about it some more. And, I was like, well, model railroading is my passion. I've had a lot of hobbies over the years, but model railroading has always been there. It's been my passion. It's marketing. How hard can it be?
Right.
And so went through an interview process, and after about 3 months, Athern hired me, and I came on board in August of 2020. And I've been there ever since.
It amazes me. So for the second time in your life, you left the cars behind and went back to model railroading. Did it when you were younger. Now you're doing, you did it in adult life too. And model railroading reeled you back in. So tell me about the role of associate brand manager. Cause is that the title that you took when you went back to Athern, I should say. Tell me a bit about your responsibility, some of the things that you get to do in that role. Sure.
I mean, if I were to narrow it down to one title, I would say herding kittens. Marketing for Athern is we're actually a small team. We're a small team at Horizon. We're one of the smaller teams at Horizon. But I'm a little biased. I think my team, the guys that I work with, are some of the most talented and just super talented modelers that I could work with. We've got an A team. As far as my responsibilities, though, biggest thing that most people will see is the social media. I do all the social media work for our Facebook, our Instagram, our Twitter. The simple things like, if you go on our Facebook page, you'll see, oh, look, there's an SD60M. I do all the art. Dawson is our lead artist. He sends that artwork to me, and then I just kind of pretty it up. I put some elements in it to make it look good for Facebook and Instagram. And then I'll do a write-up about it and say, you've got so many days to pre-order this locomotive or this freight car. Of course, I do the lives. I do a lot of the lives. I do Train Tuesday every Tuesday.
Yeah, let's talk about Train. Yeah, let's talk about
Go
Train
ahead,
Tuesday.
sorry.
No, it's okay. Let's talk about Train Tuesday for a second, because you got yourself out in front and center of the on that show. Tell us how you kind of developed that and what one could expect when they tune in on a Tuesday night.
Sure. So Train Tuesday developed long before I got there at Athern. That was really a product of Janet Bringle and Chris Palmera's, if I remember right. That was something they started during the pandemic because we couldn't go to shows anymore. And it was also a great way to showcase, hey, this is what we've got for new announcements this month. And if you go back to the early days of Train Tuesday, let's be honest, none of us knew what we were doing. It was pretty much, hey, look at this PS1 boxcar. This is cool. Yeah, that's pretty cool. You got till the end of the month to pre-order. As we progressed, we had some new management come into Athern, and we were really fortunate to have somebody come on board that had a real eye for YouTube and social media. And so he mentored me and helped me kind of develop the format that we have now. We try to keep it about 30 minutes. We try to keep front and center 2, maybe 3 items that are up for pre-order in the forefront. And I talk about the prototype because that's why we're modeling. We don't just always buy an SD60M because we like SD60Ms. We want to know a little bit about it. So we try to bring a lot of prototype information to the program, make it relevant for the modelers. And then the other thing that's great about Train Tuesday is it's interactive. People can post questions in the comments section and I can answer them. And so it's a interactive thing. So if you want to make fun of how I say a certain town, that's a great place to tune in because I'm always butchering somebody's hometown. Or, I'm not pronouncing something just right because I'm from New England and I refuse to change. But it's also a great way for them to say, hey, does this locomotive have flashing ditch lights? Are you guys going to do this type of locomotive or freight car? And it gives our customers and our fans a voice. And I think that's really important in today's manufacturing. I think one of the things that a lot of manufacturers had to kind of get rid of is that corporate shell front. This makes us a little bit more personable, a little bit more transparent. And, each week I have the opportunity to go through that media and come into the workshops of modelers everywhere. And they can say, hey, I'm going to ask Jim this question. And he's actually answered it to me. I don't have to just see these guys at a train show anymore. I can actually tune in and ask my questions online.
Yeah, it's a win-win for the consumer. It's accessibility. to be able to ask you that question directly, not have to send it in or whatnot. So there's awesome accessibility, and I'm sure for you, it's once again, you're back at the foot of the customer, and I'm sure you've got plenty of takeaways from it.
Oh, it's absolutely so much easier than just looking at a comment in a social media post. I mean, it's more interactive. And, it may sound a little corny, but you actually develop some friends out of this too. You see people that show up on a consistent basis, and they supply you with information that our product developers need. You see them at shows, and the first thing you know is you're developing a relationship with that person, and that makes it more meaningful to me. Anyways, you can put a name to a face. Oh yeah, this is Joel, and he's given us information on CA11 cabooses, and yeah, it's just a great tool. I mean, the internet is just a great tool for everybody involved.
Yeah, so you've been able to create content, you taking over, like you said, Train Tuesday on YouTube. And then I've also seen you do some Athern extras as well, and providing some videos and whatnot. Tell us a little bit about Athern Extra.
Yeah, Athern Extra was something I developed last year. And it was basically because following the format of Train Tuesday, you've got a 30-minute window. You try to stay in 30 minutes. Because not everybody wants to listen to a 2-hour podcast. And so that segment is taken care of. But we do have guys that do want to hear more about the prototype, or they do want to see more about the prototype. And if they're like me, they probably have the podcast running while they're in the shop. Mm-hmm. And so Athern Extra is more of like a podcast style show. I usually have a knowledgeable guest about the subject material that's going to be talked about. Quite often it's Tony Cook. Tony and I have done a lot of shows together.
Yeah, Tony's an excellent choice because
he's another car guy like me, so we get along really well. I've had other experts on, depending on what we're talking about. And that show is exactly what it is. It's an extra. You don't know if it's going to come out on a Tuesday, a Thursday, a Wednesday. It could come out on a Sunday afternoon. It's an extra, and it's going to have extra content to it. So if we're talking about SD60Ms, I might have Tony Cook come on board and say, hey, you know what? I've got these prototype pictures that Athern has not used. They've not been seen before. Since Tony works for White River, he's got access to Kevin Udaley's extensive collection. Yep. And we'll just talk about it. And sometimes it's just me and Tony talking about the prototype and having stories about the prototype. And I think people enjoy that personal experience, whether it be a railfan story or something that makes that model a little bit more something to associate with, I guess.
I'm gonna tell a quick Tony Cook story. So I've had Tony on the show a couple times. Sent him an email on a rail car. And I couldn't figure out who made it. It was it was a weird 50-foot high cube with a V roof on it, and I just sent him a picture. And I asked one question, Tony, who made this car? I got back more information than I would have ever imagined about that car, what the prototype was. He is just he's encyclopedia model railroading. He's just
absolutely.
It's so amazing. So great choice bringing Tony on your show, and he's a plethora of information and a super guy too. So definitely something to tune in and see when Tony's on, and at your Athern Extra, and then of course Train Tuesday on YouTube. We're going to provide all the links for these in the show notes. And also on the Facebook page, go to Around the Layout on Facebook. You'll be able to click on those links, and you'll be able to subscribe to the Athern channels on YouTube. Well, Jim, we're going to start to wrap up this episode of Around the Layout. But before we go, I want to know your current end scale layout. Let's talk a little bit about that and where you're at with it, and then what your next big accomplishment's going to be. So tell us all about it.
Sure. Well, for many years, I'd say from 2013 until about a year or two ago, I got deep into prototype modeling. I modeled the Galesburg City job. What the Galesburg City job was, an N-scale layout, pretty much to scale, built from 18-inch wide by 4-foot modules. of the Santa Fe and the CB&Q as it appeared in the summer of 1967. So that was at one time a joint project with a fellow modeler. We have since parted ways, and the city job pretty much became my full attention at that point. And like I said, summer of 67, mainly the CB&Q, switching out Butler Building. I had done a bunch of extensive walking of what was left of the area, measuring and Google Maps and all of that good stuff, scratch-built buildings. Even the music that was piped into the layout was from 1967. So I tried not to leave any detail, overlooked. Vehicles were 67 or earlier vintage. And I did that for a number of years. It was a lot of fun. But currently I am working on, I can't say it's 100% prototype. It's a small shadow box style N-scale layout. It's about 6 feet long by 14 inches wide. And it depicts the Boston of Maine in 1975 to 1983. Location is Manchester, New Hampshire. And it's just a small switching layout. It's just a small bite-sized portion of the northern line. And I've got a Facebook page for it. I think it's called Granite State Industrial. The real industrial park was called Brown Industrial. It's all code 55 microengineering track with code 40 spurs. And like I said, it is not 100%. I had to take some modeler's license, just the way the track plan is. But it ends up being a small layout that will give me anywhere between 25 to an hour of operating, fun. Yeah. And again, it's going to be mainly scratch built. The buildings will be based on actual prototype buildings, and the layout the actual terrain and stuff will be pretty close to that area. The track is where I took some liberties.
Yeah. So, going towards that smaller shelf layout, and like we talked about earlier in the show, those are certainly gaining popularity and, in small spaces. Where does the layout reside in your home?
So currently, nobody can see this, but currently it's going to be behind me on a small section of the wall. It started life as 2 3-foot T-track modules, actually. I experimented with T-track for a while. It wasn't quite my thing, so rather than get rid of these 2 modules, I started playing around. I spent about a year in AnyRail developing different track plans.
Yep.
I'm a member of the Boston and Maine Historical Society, and since then I've become acquainted and friends with Rick K. Freary, who wrote an excellent book called Queen City Rails. And that book is probably what prompted me to do this layout. It's something that I remember. I remember that area quite well from when I was younger, and it's my favorite railroad, and it's attainable. I'd have to say another inspiration, the current day inspiration, is Boomer Diorama. You can see him on YouTube. And I love his approach to model railroading. I think the British have had it right for so many years. And what I mean by that is, growing up, we all saw these basement empires in somebody's basement. And while the Brits, they didn't have that kind of room, and they would do these absolutely stunning small shadow box layouts.
Right.
And while perusing YouTube one night, I found Boomer, and it's like, hey, this guy, he's in Canada, but he's on this side of the pond, so close enough.
Yep.
And just absolutely beautiful layouts that don't take up a lot of space, and it really forces you to capture a scene. And so that's what I'm going for with this layout. I am capturing a slice of time and a slice of my childhood through this shadow box, but it would also be a fun interactive showcase as well.
Absolutely. So you get the best of both worlds, and hopefully you get an opportunity to put yourself a high rail there with a gentleman talking to a young kid in a car. That may be maybe something to put into your memory box there that you're building in N scale. So
there you go.
That's awesome. Well, Jim, thanks again for joining us on Around the Layout. We had a great time talking with you. I'm looking forward to having you back. We'll definitely, we've got so many topics to cover in this great hobby, and you certainly got yourself immersed right in the middle of it. So certainly be great to have you back again. But for now, thanks again for coming on the show, and look to talk to you soon.
Ray, thanks again for having me on board. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, absolutely, we'd love to do it again.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.